Thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Joseph Martin. Hit that like and subscribe button to support the channel and hit that bell icon to receive notifications. Let's get right to it. I believe the more I watch mainstream media, it becomes increasingly obvious they are more concerned with creating narratives than presenting the facts. Here's a clip from an interview with President Trump on Meet the Press Now with Kristen Welker.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know. It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials. We have thousands of people that are some murderers and some drug dealers and some of the worst people on earth. But some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth. And I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said. What you said is not what I heard the Supreme Court said. They have a different interpretation.
I believe that there was a reason why President Trump didn't say yes or no. It was because of how the question was framed and where she wanted to go based off either answer. If he had said yes, it would make him look like a hypocrite for not following it based off the interpretation of the law by Kristen Welker. If he said no, it would make it look like President Trump has no regard for the U.S. Constitution. So instead of totally avoiding the question, he answered it by saying, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer. And she presses him on this question again. The second time he says, I don't know, I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me. Let's watch Kristen Welker discuss President Trump's responses from that interview with Republican U.S. Representative Byron to hear his thoughts.
And joining me now is Congressman Byron, Republican from Florida.
He's
we
smiling
should also
hard.
note that he is running for governor in the great state of Florida, the Sunshine State. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
It's good to be back with you.
It's good to have you back. I know it's a busy time for you, so we really appreciate it. We're going to talk about the president's comments there as well as the economy. But let's talk about that moment when he said, I don't know, when I asked him if he has to uphold the Constitution of as the president of the United States. What was your reaction to hearing that?
Look at that headline.
He has to uphold every part of the Constitution, including the Fifth Amendment.
Trying to make somebody
First of all,
panic.
let's be clear. I think what the president was talking about is, yes, he's going to uphold the Constitution. He's taking advice from his legal team, led obviously by the White House counsel, the Attorney General of the United States, everybody working at the Department of Homeland Security, about all of the parameters that they are using to deport illegal aliens out of this country, which is the core of President Trump's victory last November. Let's remember, the American people have been clear that they want criminal illegal aliens, number one, and then illegal aliens overall returned to their home countries. Donald Trump is fulfilling that promise. Now, I think to the broader question in this entire situation, is it okay for the previous administration to abuse the border security laws, abuse asylum, abuse temporary protected status, open up the country to millions of people, and then hide behind due process where it would take us 15 years to actually process people back out of the United States?
And you're talking about the numbers. You're saying there are so many people here that it would just take too long. But let me ask you, I mean, the Constitution says that everyone who's here is entitled to due process. So I understand there are big numbers that you are talking about and that the president is dealing with. But if you're going to follow the Constitution, don't you have to follow what it says by letter and law?
Well, I think first, the other thing is you have to look at this. When you come in, let's say on an asylum package, that is at the discretion of the administration. The administration is now saying, you know what? We are going to have a legal detainer for you to be deported, and you are going to be removed from the United States. That's under the premise of how you came in. Second thing, every illegal alien that came here, the first thing they did is they broke the law coming into our country. They broke the law.
Exactly.
Let's level set here. That's what they did. So there is an orderly process that the president and his team is going through. They're not just rounding up people and dropping them out of the country. That is not true. Everybody that's been deported to this point has had a legal deportation order executed by the president's administration.
But in this case, in the case of Kilmer Abrego Garcia, the administration said it was an administrative error. And in 2019, an immigration judge issued an order that's still in effect that he should not be deported back to El Salvador. And I guess this goes back to the question that I was asking to President Trump. Do you think that everyone, citizens and non-citizens, are entitled to due process?
Well, first and foremost, let me be clear with you. When it comes to due process, that is a privilege reserved for American citizens. When people are in our country illegally, there is a semblance of due process, but not nearly at the level of a United States citizen, of an American. There are two different standards. You come to America, you are a guest in the United States. That privilege can be revoked. And a lot of these illegal aliens were not guests. They showed up at the southern border. Joe Biden abused our laws, ignored our laws, and let them in. And yet, so what are the American people supposed to say about that?
Well, the Constitution, I mean, let me just read you. This is the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces. And then it goes on to say, nor shall any person be subjected for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life, limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So the Constitution says any person, not citizen. And therein lies the debate and the root of my question. I mean, does any person just apply to citizens in your mind, or does it apply to citizens and non-citizens? The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, says it applies to citizens and non-citizens.
Congressman Donalds walked right into her trap. She wanted him to say something along the lines of not following due process regardless of its challenges. She then says, here's the Fifth Amendment, and proceeds to read it in its entirety, right? Wrong. She clipped a part out of the middle and left off the end. When you order something and you go to pick it up, when they tell you, hey, this is your order, you're not wrong in assuming it's your whole order. If not, they should let you know when you pick it up. So when she said, here's the Fifth Amendment, we're thinking it's the whole thing. She should have said, here's the part of the Fifth Amendment I'm referring to, or here's a section of it. This is why I say it's not the media's job to educate us. So here's the entire Fifth Amendment so we can see what she left out. The highlighted areas is what she left out. The Fifth Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. The key part I want you to focus on here is where it says public danger. I'm no lawyer either, but what I found during my research was that this refers to a time of significant threat or emergency facing the nation or community, such as war, insurrection or rebellion against the government, natural disasters, including pandemics that overwhelm civilian authority and require military or militia intervention to maintain order and safety. She points out that her emphasis was on the any person versus saying any citizen. Based on this interpretation of the law, it would mean since an illegal immigrant would qualify as a person, they have the right to due process regardless of the fact they unlawfully entered the country. She said, does any person just apply to citizens in your mind, or does it apply to citizens and non-citizens? When she frames the question like that, it makes it seem like he's mistaken for even thinking it only applies to a citizen. She's assuming that this is his interpretation of it because He never said it meant citizen or non-citizen. Then to justify her question, she brings up Marco Rubio, who's also a member of the Republican Party, who says it applies to citizens and non-citizens. Because President Trump, Congressman Donalds, and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is also part of Trump's cabinet, are all Republicans, it implies that Republicans are not all on the same page with this issue. Now let's look at Congressman Donalds' response to her incomplete reading of the Fifth Amendment and pushback on any person, meaning citizens and non-citizens.
Well, let's be very clear. First and foremost, when the framers wrote our Constitution, they never envisioned that there would be an executive that would allow millions of people to come into the country illegally. They never fathomed that. Number two, more importantly, you have a situation right now. Is it okay for any administration to not follow the law, abuse border security laws, let millions of people in, and then hide behind the court system to say, well, now they're here, so now we have to go through a lengthy process? Let's examine this right now. Right now, what we know is that when people came into the country illegally, almost 90% of them would not even go to the hearings. So if you're supposed to show up for a hearing and you do not go, what are we supposed to do as a country?
Very quickly, let me just interject, and we're running out of time, and I still have to get to the economy.
All right, I'm about to stop.
To your point about that.
Did you catch that? Soon as he hit her with that number, do you know how high that is? 90%. That means 9 out of 10 undocumented immigrants that have to go to a hearing, the due process that they're crying about, don't even show up. Wow. They never talk about that part in their argument. I told you, she changed the subject. Let's talk about the economy. In my opinion, the first point he made was valid. When the authors of the Constitution wrote it, they never imagined that a sitting president would open borders and allow immigrants to enter the country illegally, ultimately overwhelming our immigration system and creating a situation where their status classifies them as an undocumented immigrant. Without that foresight, the law wouldn't be written in a way to prevent or address this specific situation we're dealing with now in our country. President Biden took office January 20th, 2021. Based on MPI, Migration Policy Institute estimates, there were 11.2 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. in 2021. Based on the FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform, their estimates as of 2025 have undocumented immigrants at 18.6 million. These numbers tell us that while President Biden was in office, undocumented immigration increased by 1.85 million per year on average, which means that over his 4-year term, undocumented immigration increased by a total of 7.4 million. As of 2025, we have about 700 immigration judges, and we have over 3.6 million active immigration cases pending. That's how many cases we're behind. Let's do some math. There's 365 days in a year, but focusing on a business week minus holidays, on average, that's 250 days a year. Remember, numbers don't lie. So now that we have some numbers to work with, we can see what this would look like. Let's go to my workbook. So the back cases, that was 3.6 million. So that's 3,600,000. 3.6 million. The total cases as of 2025 was 18.6 million. So that's 18,600,000. That's our 18.6. The business days we said was 250. Judges, 700. Years, we're going to play around with that, but we're going to start with 1 year in order for them to do this in 1 year. And then the work hours for the judges per day. So let's say they work in 8 hours a day. We don't have to do the lunch part, just 8 hours a day. So 8. This is what we're looking at. So just the back cases. If we look right here, they would have to do 20 cases a day, 2.6 cases an hour. And for the total cases that we have in the United States right now, they would have to do 106 cases in a day, each judge, or 13 cases in an hour. And you can see the decimals there to be specific, but crazy. So let's say a 4-year term. We're just going to jump to the 4. That would be 1,000 days. So just the back cases, each judge would have to do 5 cases in a day. And the total cases, they would have to do 26 cases in a day. But remember, Byron Donald said that 90% of them don't even show up to the hearing. So that's what this is here for, right here, appearance percentage. So if 90 doesn't show up, that means that 10 do. So we're going to put in 10%. Look at this, guys. In 4 years, on average, just for the back cases, half the time for every day, nobody shows up. So you paying for 700 judges to work 8 hours a day, and half of the time, one person don't even show up to the hearing. This is crazy. Wow. And in the total cases, they averaging about 3 cases a day based on a 4-year time frame. Now, remember, this is only 10% of them appearing. I didn't even do the math to try to figure out how long it would take to take care of all of that. In that scenario, because this is just taking care of 10% of the problem in 4 years. So this to me is showing us that our immigration system is broken, and those who know the law are clearly exploiting it. They are exploiting it. They know that it was going to be challenging to take care of this situation, and they had the borders wide open. This is nuts. So this is what it would look like to give due process to resolve this undocumented immigration issue in a perfect world based off of whatever numbers we use. Congressman Donald's already pointed out that some of the undocumented immigrants don't even show up to the court hearings. What's crazy to me is how it never seemed like they held President Biden accountable for what was happening with the rise in illegal immigration while he was in office. He blamed limited resources and weak legislation for the problem, and it seemed like for the media, those reasons were good enough. One of the main campaign promises President Trump had was to lock down our borders and remove illegal immigrants, starting with the most dangerous and violent. He locked down the borders his first week in office, and as he's working as fast as he can to fulfill this campaign promise, the Democrats seem hell-bent on preventing this from happening. This last election between President Trump and former Vice President Harris, I'm being petty, is actually a show of respect to address a previous president or vice president as those titles, even if they no longer hold a position in office. And she always called him former President Trump. During my research, I found that there wasn't a face associated with being the border czar during the Biden administration. It was seen as a collective effort of responsibility. Vice President Harris wasn't tasked to secure the border. She was responsible for finding out why people were migrating from other countries and crossing the border. This seems like a political stunt just to make it seem like you're doing something. She didn't visit the border until the election. Research has shown throughout history that people relocate because of opportunity and or fear. And it doesn't seem like the why was more important than making sure that the migration is done legally, regardless of the increasing desire for people to want to enter the country. The voting American citizens have spoken loud and clear in our constitutional republic, which many refer to as a democracy. And that is that the country wants Donald Trump to be the president and deliver on his promises. He won all 7 swing states, the popular vote, and the Electoral College. Vice President Harris didn't win a single category. Usually the winning candidate wins the Electoral College, but the losing candidate wins the popular vote. As I stated earlier, since she lost that too, the Democrats couldn't make this argument urging to do away with the Electoral College. I want to know your thoughts on this, so leave a comment and let me know what you think. And if you want to know if Shedeur Sanders falling in the draft was due to racism and what Skip Bayless had to say about it, check out this next video. God bless.